I saw the amphitheater where the Apostle Paul delivered his messages, and of course there was no sound system at all. It was just open air, and he must have had to belt it out because that thing was huge. It was kind of a natural hill setting. Anyway, so the title of my talk is The Blessed Rest, and we're going to rest in the sufficiency of this sound system such as it is. But the subtitle is The Call to Sabbath Living. And this is an appropriate talk because, of course, this comes at the height of the vacation season. It's good to see all of you here today, but a number of people are still on vacation or have taken vacation. Reverend Ron is, of course, back east vacationing, and Wyona is also on vacation. I just noticed her note that she, in fact, is having so much fun, she's going to be gone for the rest of the month, so we'll probably see her after Labor Day. But we're all taking vacations, but you know, nonetheless, I think we're losing the art of taking vacations, particularly in this culture and in this country. And it used to be that people would regularly take 2-week vacations, and now it seems if they take anything at all, it's just a few days, and maybe it is that they're afraid that they won't be missed enough at work, and when they get back their job won't be waiting for them, or maybe it's the cost of things, I don't know. But we seem to be losing out, and I look sometimes on the internet and I try to find humorous comments of the topics of the day, and there were a lot of comments on vacations, but you know, almost a symptom of the fact people were talking about vacation, they probably weren't taking them, because what they were saying wasn't even funny. And I think one of the first things to go when you're overdue for a vacation is your sense of humor. You know, you just get so close to things, you just get so serious about everything. But there were a couple funny comments there, and again along the lines of how do you know when you're overdue for a vacation, and one of them was when you find yourself riding the kiddie rides in front of Walmart. And then there's another one where you invite yourself over to your neighbor's swimming pool, and as you're splashing around having a good time, you find yourself irresistibly fantasizing that you're in a luxury holiday resort. And then the other one is, another sure sign is when you enjoy sleeping in the living room because it gives you a change of scenery. So, there are some things like that. And I think to our language, the latest buzzword for vacation, they don't say I'm going on vacation, they say I need some downtime. And there's something I just don't like about downtime. It sounds so apologetic, it sounds so like something's broken and something needs fixing. But of course it's from the standpoint of productivity, it's downtime because you're not producing anything, but to me it was always uptime. It was always the time that made everything else worthwhile, the time that I was free to live life to its fullest and didn't have to worry about the obligations of life, and somehow, I don't know, we just lost this art. A lot of some of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about today are found in this book Sabbath by Wayne Mueller, and the subtitle is Finding Rest, Renewal, and Delight in Our Busy Lives, and I heartily recommend this book. If you haven't taken a vacation yet, it's a great book to take along with you and read during your vacation. If you're not going to take a vacation this year, I say it's mandatory reading. But it's a great book. Now, for those of us who have taken vacations ever at any time, of course, no matter how long the vacation is or how far-flung and elaborate it is, the fact of the matter is it just goes like that. And we get back, and of course the challenge then is how do we keep that exuberance, that newfound exuberance of living, that joy of living that is so stoked by the vacation time? How do we keep that in the intervening weeks and months ahead? And of course the answer is that we need to institute Sabbath living in our daily lives. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And some of the benefits of Sabbath living, and as a memory aid, I kind of got this S alliteration. Of course, Sabbath is an S. So the first idea is, what are the benefits of Sabbath living, is that we appreciate the Selah moments of life. And I'm going to explain what that is. But basically, it's the idea that Sabbath living promotes the primacy of being. And as Ruth read out of the book of Hebrews, we see that even the pattern of rest is even contained in the archetypal description of the divine creative process, that in some sense that the divine created all that is in 6 days and rested on the seventh. And because we as human beings are made in the image and likeness of God and out of God itself, that we ought to do likewise. But now, if you don't particularly subscribe to that theology, that's okay, because if you just look at nature, you see that this pattern of rest is embedded in nature, in the daily cycle of things. For example, I watch the birds in my yard. The first light, they're up there out chirping and looking for seeds and water. And then as the heat of the day goes on, they get a little less active. And then, of course, again in the evening, they go out looking for seeds to kind of tide them over for the inactive period, which is once darkness falls and they're asleep in the trees. Except for my birds, of course, I go out there to feed them seeds, throw the seed under the tree, and midnight it wakes them all up and scares them out of the tree. And birds can't fly very well at night because they go shooting across the backyard and ping, right into the fence. Oh. So, but they're usually all right, but they just don't fly very good at night. But that's their dormant period, is at night. And then, of course, the cycle of the year, we see, the springtime, the growth cycle begins. It reaches its peak about now. And then as the days get shorter, it slackens off until there's the dormancy of winter. So there's that pattern of rest alternated with activity in nature. And let me say, though, right at front here, that this talk is not in any way, should not in any way be construed as being, putting down work in any way, because this is a balanced teaching, okay? There's a balance here between being and doing. And of course, being meaning that we rest in our sufficiency and our perfection. There's the idea that we are all perfect, whole, and complete just as we are. There's nothing that we can get out here that's going to make us any more whole or complete. There's nothing that we need to get rid of that's going to make us any more complete or whole. We're perfect just the way we are. The other side of that is there's a sense of our souls becoming. There's a sense that we, like the divine, we're in this divine creative process, and our soul's energy is focused on making its invisible attributes visible in the physical world of effects. And both are good and both are necessary. But our society is tending toward an imbalance, and they just tend to focus on the doing rather than the being. And I think ideally, again, because think about the divine creative process, that consciousness precedes form, that thought precedes effect. And so conscious doing ideally should flow out of conscious being and out of a sense that we are perfect, whole, and complete, that we don't have to do something here to impress somebody or do something out here to make us more perfect, because we are perfect. Now, getting on to these Selah moments, and I want to focus on this a little bit. And what are the Selah moments? Actually, the word Selah is found in the book of Psalms in the Old Testament. And biblical scholars are not really sure what this is for certain, but because it's old stuff, old literature. But probably because the Psalms were written to be sung, it was probably like a rest in musical notation where the music's paused. But it also seems that this word appears right after a particularly profound passage, so it's almost like there needs to be a pause to contemplate, because there's more than meets the eye. There's a deeper level to what has just been said. So in any case, the parallel is clear, that because there are certain events in our daily lives that come up that just call for that pause for contemplation. An example would be in my own life. There have been times when I went out on my front porch to sweep the porch, and it happened to be evening, just about the height of the sunset, and it was one of those fantastic desert sunsets. It was all of its glory, and somehow if I just continued to sweep the porch, that just would have been so inappropriate. It would have been unthinkable. I mean, because there was all this glory, and it just called to pause and to appreciate that moment and just to fully take it in, that confluence of the atmosphere and my own mental state and just the joy that that brought, you see, and that was a pause for reflection. Another example in my own life that happens nearly every day is I get up in the morning and, you know, the usual routines of cleaning, washing, and shaving, and then fixing my breakfast. And then I have my little cup of tea that's been brewing there while I've been eating my breakfast. And something about that tea, and I think that's probably why tea time started in England. It's that opportunity to pause, to break that activity, pause right on the cusp of, you know, the activity, the work of the day, and just, I usually turn my chair like 3/4 away around and look out through my picture window and just kind of take inventory, just kind of take stock of where I am and what I'm doing and how I feel, and there's just something rich about that before I plunge into whatever the tasks of the day are. Okay, so S alliteration. Now, another benefit of the Sabbath living is that we find our signature in consciousness, which is another way of saying self-realization. It connects us with our true and authentic self. And earlier this summer, I read a book by Neil Goldsmith. It's not to be confused with Joel Goldsmith, but Neil Goldsmith has a doctorate in psychology, and he was writing on how mystical experience heals people. And his whole idea was kind of like the Zen koan. It says, show me the face that you had before your parents were born. And in his personality theory, you know, the unborn child is perfect and whole and complete. It's born into a family situation with its parents, with all the expectations and the social dynamic of its parents, and it kind of has to fit in, and of course it's totally dependent on the parents for its very existence. And kind of like there's a parallel, kind of like the story of Jacob and Esau in the Bible, where Esau sold his birthright for a bunch of food. That's kind of what the child does. It sells out its true and authentic self to fit in and get nurtured, and of course then it grows up, becomes more self-sufficient, and begins its spiritual path of reclaiming its true and authentic self. And of course, mystical experience helps because it shows us that face we had before our parents were born. It gives us that blueprint. But short of that, it's these, and Sabbath moments are soul-tending moments, and it's these moments that we nurture our soul with aesthetic beauty, with art, with the love of nature, with nurturing relationships, anything that delights our soul, you see, that helps us to regain that sense of the sacred, to regain that sense of who we really are. And Centers for Spiritual Living has a list of what they call core values, and it's these things I just mentioned: the love of nature, aesthetic beauty, art, creativity, these kinds of things. And in a world that works for everyone, these values are foremost. But of course, as we know today, so often when there's a choice between one of these core values and something to do with the economy or jobs, the economy and the jobs always trump the other things. So for example, if you have a beautiful rainforest, but somebody finds oil there, well, do you want a beautiful rainforest or do you want to drive your car to work tomorrow? I see. So, or another example, if you've got a beautiful pristine desert out there and somebody decides they want to put windmills on there, well, do you want a pristine desert or do you want to run your swamp cooler with the power? So, but how can we expect that these core values of compassion and beauty and love and nature will be foremost on the global consciousness if we don't take time to honor them and cherish them on the individual level, you see? Because what is the global consciousness is simply sum total of all of the individual consciousness and how we make our decisions in that consciousness. So the third benefit of Sabbath living is Basically, simplification, the idea that we want to live life by design and not by default. And I've got a note here that Sabbath days are designer days. It's a time that you set aside to, if you were king or queen, if you could have your life any way you want, you set aside time and you make this time. You delight your soul with the beauty and just, it's the things, as Wayne Mueller says, that are nourished, that grow with time, that you can't just, snap your finger and it's done. It's the things that require that quality time invested in it. And of course, in our culture, Sunday is one such day, and all of you here who are attending this spiritual center, of course, you've got half of a designer day already made for you, because here we are. We've come together, we've been singing spiritual songs, we've been greeting each other, we're inspired, we have a nice meal that we share together, and then if you go from there and don't go too roughshod into the rest of the day, maybe enjoy quality time with your loved ones, or read a good book, or listen to a nice piece of music, you see, that's what the true Sabbath time is all about. But, and I've lived a few decades now, and I think there's part of the art of life has to do with simplifying and minimizing what these low-level demands of life, so that we can go for what is excellent. And this takes us to a reading by Howard Thurman, and this is for the Inward Journey. This is an oft-quoted passage entitled The Moments of High Resolve, and he's had this overarching vision of his purpose and this high place and high purpose for his life, but he comes to a conclusion about that. He says, I had forgotten how easy it is to forget. He says, there was no intent to betray what seemed so sure at the time, but little by little there crept into my life the dust and grit of the journey. Details, lower level demands, all kinds of cross currents. Nothing momentous, just wear and tear. And then he has a Selah moment. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. And the Sabbath time gives us an opportunity to set aside these low-level demands. And you never get to the bottom of your bucket list, if you've ever noticed that. If you wait for all the work that can be done to be done before you take a break, you're never going to take a break. So there's a time when you say, enough. You set that aside, you create sacred space, which, as we mentioned at the beginning of the service, every space is sacred, but people say there's nothing sacred anymore, but the fact of the matter is everything is sacred. But people that say that are really saying that they don't have the consciousness anymore. They don't know how to get back to the consciousness that everything is sacred, that their lives are sacred. And, of course, this is the way you do it, by stopping and setting aside that space and recognizing and being in that holiness and living that way. So, but in our lives, there's probably a handful of things that our soul could engage itself on in an excellent level that would provide the biggest gift, the brightest light, by engaging in those activities. And there's, of course, the low-level demands. There doesn't seem to be any end to them, and many of these can be done by somebody else. But we need to practice just setting those aside from time to time and simplifying down. So we've been talking about these benefits then of Sabbath living. The idea of the Selah moments, the idea of finding a signature in consciousness, self-realization, and then simplification. And in conclusion, I want to talk a minute or two about how do we do this on a practical level. How do we implement Sabbath living on a practical level? And it's by creating what I call levels of refreshment. So you have daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. So the daily we talked about, which part of it, that's your spiritual practice, prayer and meditation. And then, of course, being open and available for those Selah moments when life you just come and you pause and appreciate the perfection of the moment. Weekly is, for us, our culture, that's Sunday. We've set aside that time just to be in the beingness of things, to appreciate and move into gratitude for what is and the perfection and the beauty of our lives just the way they are. Monthly, for me, I always try to, at least one weekend a month, I try to get out of town. And we talked about change of scenery, and of course the soul delights in change and different, because we get so in, and you know, this is even if you're retired. I mean, have you noticed that when you retire, you just trade one set of daily routines for another? And it's those daily routines that we need to get away from it, because we tend to go unconscious when we just do the same thing over and over in the same way. So getting out of town, and of course again the low-level demands tend to diminish, because hopefully you can dine out and you don't have to buy the food and fry it up and clean up the dishes afterwards, and again the change of scenery. So that's always to me just a break. And then of course yearly is our annual vacation, and so often people nowadays, when they do take the vacation, they almost have to justify it by, well, I'm learning a new skill. I'm going to go to computer camp and do this, or I'm going to go here, or I'm going to go to Europe and I'm going to see 20 countries in 5 days. You know, I didn't do that, honest. But people do that, and that's the kind of vacation you need a vacation from. It's that. And I remember as kids, we'd just go on 2 weeks cabin at the lake. And what would we do? We didn't have computer camp. We didn't learn this or that. We just run around barefoot picking huckleberries and rowing rowboats and swimming and playing with the cats. And 2 weeks, it was just refreshing. So again, I want to reiterate the idea that it's a balance. Being and doing, it's a balance. You do both, but it's keeping those in balance. And in conclusion, I'm going to read a little poem that's out of Wayne Mueller's book here. It's an untitled poem by Wendell Berry, and it's relevant because it most perfectly and poetically expresses that balance between being and doing. Whatever is foreseen in joy must be lived out from day to day. Vision held open in the dark by our 10,000 days of work. Harvest will fill the barn. For that the hand must ache, the face must sweat. And yet no leaf or grain is filled by work of ours. The field is tilled and left to grace. That we may reap, great work is done while we're asleep. When we work well, a Sabbath mood rests on our day and finds it good. Blessings to you, and namaste.